Hello everybody, my name's Mark. I'm a psychologist and a former Jehovah's Witness. And in this video I wanted to offer my critique to a elders training video, which was obviously not for the rank and file members to see. It was for elders being trained how to respond when they're approached with someone who's grieving, particularly when someone is suicidal. This being a very serious subject, I wanted to take a few moments just to critique it and give my professional opinion on this. Also, by the fact that I'm a former Jehovah's Witness as well, means I can give some personal insight on this as well. Okay, so the video that we're about to see was released in 2017, I believe, obviously only for elders to see. It's quite surprising. I've watched the whole thing through already. I took a few notes. It opens with a woman who's obviously grieving the death of her husband, and she says that she's triggered by the song that she was singing in the Kingdom Hall. Okay, so let's see the first part of the film.
Brother Shepherd, can I talk with you, please?
Of course. It looks like the library is available. I see Brother Good nearby. Is it okay if I invite him to join us?
Yes, thank you.
Bill. Mary Johnson would like to speak with us in the library. Can you join us?
Sure. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Can we help Mary?
I can't take the loneliness anymore. I want my Todd back. I want my life back like it was before. The last song triggered my feelings. It feels like my heart is being ripped out of my chest all over again.
We can understand why the song would affect you that way. You and Don had a wonderful relationship.
Why am I still so torn up? It's been a year already.
Even though it's been a year and you've made good progress in coping, it's not wrong to still have moments of intense grief. When Jacob thought that his son Joseph had been killed, Genesis says that his father continued weeping for him.
Nothing can take away this pain of heart until Don and I are reunited as husband and wife.
That's a natural reaction, Mary. Remember, though, that Jehovah will continue to support you.
And one of the ways that he does this is by means of the elders.
I know, and I appreciate your help. It's just that...
Mary, would you be available for a visit this afternoon? Say around 1:30?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Brother Shepherd. And you too, Bill.
Overall, it seems Mary is doing better than she did just a few months ago. However, she still has some very emotional setbacks.
Yes, and I thought we could take a couple of minutes to find some verses. And perhaps a magazine article that could help her strengthen her determination to be an integrity keeper. And first, let me say a brief prayer, asking for Jehovah's guidance.
Okay, so the first thing that stood out here was the elders automatically, very early in, set up this idea that grieving is not wrong. Of course, grieving isn't wrong, but straight away the fact that they would mention that so early made me think, why are they saying this? And it becomes apparent that they set up this false dichotomy that there's such a thing as acceptable grief and unacceptable grief, that some feelings are natural and okay and some feelings are immoral. This is a rather dangerous precedent to set and a very dangerous position to start from. And it kind of implies that there's a moral boundary that's not to be crossed, that some feelings are okay and some feelings aren't. And this really lays the groundwork for shame-based interpretation of suffering. And from a mental health perspective, grief isn't linear. It can't so easily be categorized. And mourning a spouse and contemplating suicide in the intensity of that grief should never be moralized. You shouldn't make a moral issue of it, because pathologizing thoughts and feelings can lead to deeper depression and a higher suicide rate risk. This next point here kind of hit me personally, as I'm sure it will you too if you're a former Jehovah's Witness, is that she clings on to the resurrection hope. Now, From a mental health perspective, although personal beliefs and even religious beliefs can be comforting and help you get through a difficult time, in the Jehovah's Witness mindset, and particularly this example, it's really holding her back from processing her grief and moving on with it. You wouldn't be advised to get over it and move on. You would be helped to work through that, to process and accept the things that have happened and work through it. But this mindset here within the Jehovah's Witness context really holds people back because they haven't accepted the fact that the person that they've lost is dead and isn't coming back. And you might have religious beliefs that say you are going to see them again in heaven or whatever else, but still you need to process the grief and process the fact that the person is gone. And I personally believe that this keeps a lot of people in the Jehovah's Witness faith. I can think of members of my family, for example. We've lost members of my family when I was younger, and no matter what the organisation does, no matter what the elders do, they will go along with it anyway because it's the only hope they have of seeing their dead loved ones again. Particularly, I think, when it comes to children. If you think of people who've lost children, it's understandable. The grief would be huge, particularly with the blood issue as well. If you've lost someone because of the blood transfusion issue, you're more than likely to double down and stay within the Jehovah's Witness faith because that religion teaches you that it's the only way you'll get to see your dead loved one again. And this kind of mentality has actually been shown to inhibit emotional resilience and inhibit emotional growth and really stalling one's mental health.
Amen.
Thank you so much for coming, brothers. It just seems that I can't get over Don's death. I'll be okay for a day or two, and then anything could trigger this devastating hollow void I feel inside. I've had to run the business all by myself, and I don't have to remind you of the troubles I've had with the house. Sometimes I feel so worn out, I don't want to go on anymore. I really don't. I've even had thoughts of turning the car on in the garage and just going to sleep inside.
Thank you for feeling comfortable enough to tell us that. It is not unusual for intense grief to cause bouts of depression and even some irrational thoughts. You know who you remind me of, Mary? You remind me of Job of old. Satan tries to capitalize on tragic events to cause a lover of Jehovah to falter spiritually. We often set Job up on a pedestal, as if he were a perfect integrity keeper. Mary, always remember that while Job kept his integrity, he was imperfect, with feelings just like yours.
I don't think he was as messed up as I am.
Let's think about that. He lost 10 family members in death, and he lost the family business altogether. Turn to Job, chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. Let's see if you can relate to him. Job, chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. It says, "Oh, that my vexation," that's his emotional anxiety, "my vexation were altogether weighed, and that at the same time my adversity they would put on scales themselves." Mary, he doesn't think that anyone can know how he feels. If they could put his emotional pain on scales and see the needle register into the red, then maybe someone could understand what he's going through. Verse 3. "For now it," that's his vexation, "is heavier even than the sands of the seas." Does that sound like you, Mary? What was the effect on righteous Job? It continues, "That is why my own words have been wild talk." Do you know what some of his wild talk was, Mary?
Was it his questioning why Jehovah allowed it all?
That's true too, but he felt much like you just described yourself. Well, Job didn't have a car in the garage. He said in chapter 7, "My soul chooses suffocation, death, rather than my bones. In chapter 10, he said, I have a loathing for life. He had wild thoughts like you have. But think about it. We don't call him Job the emotionally distraught soul, do we? No, he was Job the integrity keeper because he did not give in to his irrational thoughts. Mary, thus far you too are an integrity keeper. Like Job, be determined not to give in to such wild thoughts. When such a thought comes to mind, treat it as you would an immoral thought. What would you do with an immoral thought?
Reject it.
That's right. Change that thought. Even physically doing something different. Repeat to yourself, I am an integrity keeper. I am an integrity keeper. And if possible, read a little from the Psalms to help stabilize your emotions.
Thank you for sharing that. I needed to hear it. And I do want to provide Jehovah with an answer to the taunter.
Mary, before we came over, we did a little research and have some verses we'd like to share. They might help you to continue making progress in coping with your grief.
I need all the help I can get.
Please find Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11 and 12. We know that it has been difficult for you to get the calamity of Dawn's death out of your mind, and that's understandable. But Mary, how does Jehovah view you and your situation? You see, Jehovah has the ability to look beyond your calamity and to see you in the future when your hopes become a reality. Read these beautiful words in verse 11 with me and be thinking, this is what Jehovah thinks when he looks down and sees what Mary is dealing with. It reads, For I myself well know the thoughts that I am thinking toward Mary, is the utterance of Jehovah. Thoughts of peace. It says he thinks of peace when he sees you, and not of calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Jehovah chooses not to dwell on the calamity, but he looks to your peaceful future and hope.
What a wonderful example for all of us, to try to focus not on the calamity, but on our future and our hopes.
Now look at the assurance he gives to you, Mary, in verse 12. When you pray to him, what will happen? It says, and you will certainly call me and come and pray to me. And Jehovah says, I will listen to you. Isn't that comforting and reassuring?
Yes. Yes, it is. I don't ever remember reading those verses before.
God's word is alive and in effect adapts to our changing circumstances with a word behind us saying, this is the way, Mary. Walk in it with his people.
It's interesting here that the elders are looking at this as a moral issue. They're talking about integrity rather than the fact that the person's grieving and they need emotional support. There's been no mention of referral to a GP, no mention of referral to a mental health specialist, no mention of asking her to refer herself to these services. I can understand, to be fair, that they're not there to provide mental health. They're there to provide spiritual guidance. But they really shouldn't step outside their boundaries there. When it comes to spiritual guidance, that's something that's personal to a person. But still, they really should be referring her to mental health specialists. A person expressing suicidal ideation needs to be assessed by mental health specialists, certainly by their doctor. There's been no mention of a follow-up here, no mention of referral. And the elders aren't clinically trained in counselling, in therapy, in mental health, in people skills, none of that. They're not trained in any of those things. They're literally just like managers, basically, of a corporation. And it's also interesting that during this interaction, the elders haven't shown any genuine concern. It all seems to be very scripted. And indeed, this video itself is designed to give the elders instruction on how to respond. There's nothing personal here. There's nothing authentic. And I kind of see this as a big shame anyway, because when I was in the Jehovah's Witnesses, there was one or two elders that I thought were okay, one or two elders that I thought were really, really kind. But even then, there was a point where if you were to confess something to them or come to them with a problem, they would suddenly switch into elder mode, and they wouldn't be answering you as a friend or someone who really, really cared about you. Even if they did care about you, they were responding in the way the Watchtower Society had told them to respond. Now notice here that they've reframed suicidal ideation as a moral issue. They've linked suicidal thoughts to immoral ones. When you frame suicidal ideation or such thoughts like that as a moral issue, you're introducing religious shame in an already fragile emotional state. And this is extremely dangerous. Research shows that when you moralize issues like this, it drives people further into depression, further into grief, and pretty much increases the risk that they will take their own lives. It's a really dangerous thing to do. Research has shown that when you do this, when you moralize and pathologize thoughts, particularly suicidal ideation, it leads to internalized stigma, concealment, where they hide what they're about to do, and results in a higher suicide risk. So suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, is not a sin, it's a symptom of grief, and it's a symptom of mental stress that needs to be dealt with by a mental health specialist. It's often a result of unresolved grief and complex trauma. Notice how he uses the word we. We think, we do this, we do that. And this was something that really spoke to me when I was a Jehovah's Witness, this use of the word we all the time. So you might be at a meeting and someone on the platform uses the word we. We always think this, we are very happy, we don't like this. It's groupthink. That's a perfect example of groupthink. And in this particular case, the elder has taken this person's experience and compared her to another person, to Job in this case. And when he does this, this invalidates her feelings and it robs her of her individuality. Her experience is real to her, and that experience is what needs to be looked at and examined. And by ignoring her emotional feelings, it's a form of emotional invalidation. Now, grief is very personal. In person-centered approaches, such as those devised by Carl Rogers, a psychologist I'll probably talk about in a future video, in person-centered therapy, the person comes to you as the expert of their experience. So if someone came to me for therapy, I would ask them to teach me what it's like to be you and how you feel, and what's the patterns you go through when you have these feelings, and what are you telling yourself, and how you see the world. And from that, I would construct a reality inside me so I can understand what they're going through. And by doing that, I work with them to create their own therapy and their own recovery. But I can't do that unless I validate their experience and understand what they're going through. Comparing them to another person isn't helpful whatsoever. Comparisons aren't only unhelpful, but it invalidates their feelings.
I'd like to give you an assignment. Will you agree to memorize those 2 verses? Then, when you're overwhelmed, repeat the verses to yourself. Even doing so out loud, it might have a calming effect on you.
I'll do that and give it a try.
Now, when the elder gives scriptures to memorize, at first I thought he was going to refer to affirmations. Now, positive affirmations can be very helpful. I was initially skeptical of them in my early years, but actually I see the benefit of them now. In this case, though, he's given scriptures to memorize, but that's an external source. When it comes to positive affirmations, or indeed any affirmation, it has to be personal, it has to come from the person. They have to generate themselves because it will have meaning to them. It'll be very specific to their experiences. They have to be self-generated to have any psychological effect. Because if they're not, they're just regarded as an external source, external dogma, which will have no real effect on them whatsoever. In cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, affirmations work best when they're personally constructed and personally relevant to the person themselves. They have to arise from the person's own core values.
Oh, I'm sorry. I must be losing my mind. I meant to set out some cookies to go with your coffee.
Hooray, in the end she cheered up. Everything's fine, right? No. This momentary uplift in emotional state isn't uncommon, even in therapy. It doesn't mean she's cured, it just means you've changed her state. That's not very difficult to do. A person can put a DVD on and watch a comedy and feel a bit better, maybe even a little laugh. It doesn't mean they're cured. Depression and grief is a very complex thing to deal with. It could even be a compliance mask because she's in a room with two men who have more authority than she does, and she feels emotionally pressured to comply with what they're saying. Maybe even subconsciously she'd go along with their suggestions, but as soon as they're gone, it'll come back. Her depression will come back. So these momentary lifts in mood are not uncommon at all in therapy. Even manic depressives have the occasional bout of feeling better. It's interesting here as well, you'll note that there's been no idea of a follow-up. You're not going to check up on her an hour, in a day, a week, 2 weeks, a month. In actual therapy, you're supposed to follow up with your client regularly. You would give them a journal, for example, to write down how they feel, which would be therapeutic in itself. And you would go through them in your next session to see what they went through and how they processed that. In this example here, they didn't do any of those things. They just literally gave her a warning to reject immoral thoughts, compared her to a vile character, told her that her feelings were immoral and to reject them, and give her some Bible passages to memorize, and that's it. That is terrible advice. Terrible advice. Not only from a therapeutic point of view, but I'm surprised that a religious organisation, with all the money and influence they have on this person, they haven't thought of doing that. I mean, they could have just, hired a psychologist or psychotherapist and asked them for input, or got that person to write a guide for the elders, or produce a training video for the elders. But they haven't done any of that. And this is just another example of a religious organisation that thinks it knows best. None of this advice has come from the Bible anyway, as far as I'm aware. In fact, I don't think the Bible gives any advice with regards to mental health. If this was a real situation, this woman would be a serious suicide risk, serious relapse risk. And there's been many accounts of Jehovah's Witnesses, unfortunately, committing suicide, particularly in situations like this, because if they're told that their feelings are immoral, they're going to feel even worse and drive them deeper into depression, and more likely not tell anybody that they felt that way because they'll be judged again. And this is the kind of thing that perpetuates mental illness in such authoritarian religious groups. Instead of empowering this woman, they've just made her feel bad, invalidate her own thoughts, compared her to somebody else, and just not provided any real care whatsoever. Okay, that was my take on this video. I had watched it all the way through before, obviously, to take notes, but watching it again with you now just obviously makes me a little bit annoyed to see that this is the kind of advice that's been given to people who are grieving. And I was a Jehovah's Witness. I understand what it's like to be one. I understand what it's like to grieve. And I understand what it's like thinking that if you go to the elders, they'll have the answers. And this is an example of they don't have the answers. They might think they do, but they don't. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness or former Jehovah's Witness, or anybody at all who's feeling suicidal or is grieving, my advice to you is please speak to your GP, to a mental health professional. At the very least, speak to a friend or someone who'll listen to you without judgment, because that's what matters. Acceptance of the situation and speaking to someone who cares. If you like this video and you want to see more of it, just hit the subscribe button. exJW Recovery. See you soon.